Hi, Nine. Welcome back to the final lesson of week 8, where we're going to be moving on from defences, and we're going to be looking at something called vaccinations. And again, this topic is very good time to be doing this topic, purely because you will be coming across a lot of these terms and things like that, so you can see what they actually mean and be able to educate your family as well. So what we are going to be looking at today is vaccinations and how vaccinations work. Before we go on to that though, from last lesson where we were looking at the body defense systems to jog your memory, can we put down 3 of the key words from last lesson and define them? Or can we put 3 sentences about 3 really important points that we covered from last lesson? Or write a paragraph summarising the whole lesson. So if you could pick one of those options, please pause the video and do that now. Okay, so we're going to look at what you need to take away from this lesson now. For the previous task, obviously, do go back through your notes, just make sure that you are getting the correct information down and correct if necessary. But it's good to kind of summarise big chunks of lessons into smaller bite-sized amounts, so then it does help to remember them. So what we're going to be looking at today, the basics are going to be able to describe why we vaccinate, and also stating that vaccines contain dead or inactive, that is the terms we need to use, dead or inactive forms of a pathogen. For 5-6 we need to explain, so say why or how vaccinations actually work, how it is that they protect people, and describe what an antibody and an antigen are. For 7-8, we need to explain why vaccinating a large proportion of the population reduces the spread of a pathogen. So why it's important that lots of people get vaccinated, not just a few. And also apply the ideas about the specificity of antibodies. So how an antibody is specific to an antigen. Okay, so last lesson we looked at how white blood cells actually work, what it is that they do. I want you to have a think about this question though. How do white blood cells detect invading pathogens? So how is it that they know that a cell is a pathogen and not just a normal body cell? What stops them from destroying your cells as well? So have a think about that. What do you think it is that causes that? You do not need to write your answer down. Okay, so the reason for it is that on all cells, you have a structure, a protein, called an antigen. So these are on the surface of all cells, bacterial cells, human cells, all of the other plants and animal and fungal cells. Now, every cell has got a unique antigen. So you have got specific antigens that will be different to your friends' antigens. Okay, they are specific, they are unique. The antigens on the microbes that get into your body, so the pathogens that get into our body, will be different to the ones that are on your own cells. So it's kind of a recognition system. So the white blood cells, it says on the diagram, they're T cells. It's a type of white blood cell. You don't need to know that they're T cells. But the white blood cells will go along and they will look at the surface of cells, and they'll recognize their own cells, and then they'll also recognize if there is a cell that is not your own, so a foreign cell. Okay, so can we put down, please, in our notes what an antigen is and where you find it and what they do? So antigens are proteins found on the surface of cells that white blood cells can recognize. Okay, so we're going to be looking at how antigens and antibodies relate to each other. Now, quite a lot of you will have had chickenpox when you were younger. And when the chickenpox virus gets inside you, white blood cells will learn how to make specific antibodies that stick to the antigens of the chickenpox virus. Now, once you recover from chickenpox, and it's not a very serious condition when you are younger, but when you recover from it, those white blood cells will stay in your body and they will know how to make those antibodies. So if you come across the chickenpox virus again, your white blood cells will make loads and loads of these antibodies that will fight chickenpox, and you recover a lot quicker. Now, specific antibodies will fit to specific antigens. So once your white blood cell has learned how to make the right antibody, it's pretty much there for a long period of time. So if you ever come across that disease, as I say, with chickenpox, you'll be able to fight it very, very quickly. Now, if we look at this graph, we've got, going up the y-axis, the concentration of antibodies in the blood, and going along the x-axis, we have the numbers of days. And we're starting off with the first exposure to a microorganism. So this could be, for instance, the chickenpox virus. So once somebody has been exposed to the chickenpox virus is inside your body, your white blood cells quite slowly learn how to produce the right antibody. So they need to find which white blood cell will have the right antibodies to produce. And it takes quite a long time in the first instance, which is why when you first have chickenpox, you'll have the trademark rashes and welts on your body, and that will last for a reasonable amount of time. Now, you can see that on the graph, it goes up about 22 days, where you're producing the most amount of antibodies, and then the antibodies start going down, and that's you tackling the microorganism until it's left your system. But you can see that the red line doesn't go back to zero. It stays in your body. So when you then get a second exposure of the same microorganism, your body very, very quickly starts producing lots and lots of antigens. And that means that you will become better, that you will recover very, very quickly. You probably won't even notice that you are ill in the first place. So can you explain the initial delay? That's because the white blood cells will not know how to produce those antibodies to begin with, those specific antibodies to begin with. How do you think this graph is linked to how a vaccine works? Well, as we're going to have a look at, what vaccines do is cause your white blood cells to learn how to make those specific antibodies. So some pathogens, such as the ones that cause meningitis, can make you really, really ill. Quite often, it can lead to mortality as well. Now, fortunately, you can be protected against many of these serious diseases by something called a vaccination. So if any of you have had the MMR, which I imagine a lot of you have had, most of you will have had, it actually vaccinates against measles, meningitis, and rubella. So meningitis would be one of the things that you're vaccinated against in the MMR. Now, there is a video available for this. I'll put the link on Show My Homework that just goes through how a vaccination works. So can you leave this PowerPoint now, go on to Show My Homework and follow the link to the introduction to how vaccinations work. Now we're going to have a look at what you need to know about how vaccinations actually work. And it will be referred to as immunization. So if you are immunizing a population, you are giving them a vaccine. And that vaccine contains dead or inactive forms of a disease. So, for instance, it might be a little chunk of a specific bacteria that's got the antigens on it, or it might be a dead form of it. And it causes your body to go through that natural immune response. But because they're dead or inactive, it doesn't make you ill. So your body will actually respond to those dead or inactive microorganisms, and they will learn how to fight against it, producing those specific antibodies. So you get small amounts of the dead pathogen or inactive pathogen, and it's usually done by it being injected. It's the most effective method, as horrendous as it might be. The antigens in the vaccine stimulate your white blood cells into making the right antibodies. And it will destroy the antigens without any risk of you picking up the disease. Because it's dead or inactive, it means that you won't actually get that disease. You are immune then to future infections. So if you come across that disease, you'll actually be immune to it because your body knows automatically how to fight it and produces lots and lots of those antibodies. Okay, so we're going to do a little flow chart or you're going to be doing a little flow chart of how a vaccine works. And I suggest having 6 sort of sections to it. It doesn't matter how you decide to split up your page or how you do this. This is just an example of it. So you've just got your 6 boxes of how it works with a little box of some words that you can add to it. So you might want to pause the video now and get something that looks like that flowchart down. Now what you're going to do, and this can be based on the stuff you've heard from me, from the video, but also some further research on the internet, is in your flow diagram you are going to explain how vaccines work. And I've put down 5 things that we really need to make sure are in it. I know it's 6 boxes, but these are 5 things that we're going to have to have in it. It's really important we know what vaccines contain. So that needs to be very clear in your flowchart. We need to show how vaccines get into the body. We need to have what white blood cells do in response to the vaccine. We need to know what happens if sometime later the pathogen does get into your body. And then the final one is going to be how white blood cells respond to the pathogen. So what those white blood cells do. So I'd like you to create your flowchart. Do try and include pictures. I'm not much of an artist myself, but it does actually help in remembering things, having the picture and the words alongside it. So can you have a flowchart of how a vaccine works, including those things, and obviously having those important words like antibodies and antigens in there as well. So pause the video and complete your flowchart now, please. Okay, so hopefully we've got our flowchart completed on how a vaccine works, including those important bits of information. So now that we know how a vaccine actually works, we're going to look at how it can actually protect populations of people. So we've got 2 diagrams at the bottom. We've got population A and population B. The blue circles are representing somebody who has had a vaccine, so an immunized person. A red circle is showing an infected person, and the purple circles are non-immunized people, so people that haven't had the vaccine. And the question is, which population would measles spread through the quickest and why? So looking at those pictures, which one do you think measles will spread the quickest in and why? So have a think about that answer. You don't need to write the answer down, just have a think about it with a reason why. Okay, so I imagine most of you have gone for population B. So it would go, for the quickest will be population A. It will be slowest in population B. Quickest in population A because there's less people that are immunized or less people that have had the vaccine. So it's easily spreads from person to person. Whereas if you look at population B, the infected person is surrounded by people that have had the vaccine. They are immunized. And this is the whole kind of purpose of vaccination programs, is you produce something called herd immunity. Now, this came about, this was spoken about right at the beginning of the pandemic in England, because it was kind of where the government were heading towards. They thought that if enough people became infected with the coronavirus, that people would be immune and it would create herd immunity, so it would protect everyone else. Unfortunately, though, they soon realised that a lot of people were going to die from natural herd immunity, which is why they then introduced the lockdowns. But we can get herd immunity through vaccinations, where obviously people aren't dying from the diseases. So if a large proportion of a population is immune to disease, then it's really hard for that pathogen to spread around. So we call that herd immunity. And the reason why it's called herd immunity is it was first talked about when they were vaccinating cows. So here's a graph to show an example of a vaccination program and producing herd immunity. So in the yellow line that you can see on the graph, it's just showing the numbers of reported cases of a disease. This is actually whooping cough. And then going along the bottom, you can see the different years. So it's going through the decades. The red arrow is showing when vaccinations actually start, and there isn't any data to say how many people did get it, the vaccination, until about 1968, I think it was, when they knew that 81% of people had it. So the green line is showing how many people have been vaccinated. The yellow line, how many people get the disease. So what is the link, looking at that graph, what is the link between those two pieces of information? Is there a relationship between the green line, the number of people who are, the percentage of people being vaccinated, and the yellow line, the number of cases of that disease? So can you pause the video, have a good think about it, because you will be asked many graph questions in the exams, and they will not all be straightforward ones. Some of them you will have to actually think about what it's showing and link the two things together. So pause the video, have a think. What is the relationship between those two bits of data? Okay, so hopefully you realise that, or hopefully you thought that the more people were vaccinated, the less cases there were. And you can see that there's a point in the green line where it drops significantly the number of people having the vaccination, and that actually caused peaks of the whooping cough cases. So there is definitely a relationship between the percentage of people having the vaccine and then the number of cases. Now, the reason for that 30%, that drop, is because there was some information, it wasn't correct information, I suppose Trump would call it fake news. There was some fears that there was a safety concern with the whooping cough vaccination. So huge amounts of people decided not to have their children vaccinated or immunized against whooping cough. In fact, it went down all the way down to 30%. And then that caused a huge amount of cases, much more than they'd experienced in previous decades. And then they realised that actually it was fine, and started vaccinating again. And so the number of cases went down. Now, we're actually having that issue at the moment with measles. So there was, quite a while ago now, when I was young, there was a report that the MMR vaccination caused issues in children. So loads and loads of parents decided not to get their children vaccinated with the MMR. And that caused a big peak in the cases of measles. Measles was pretty much eradicated because of vaccinations, but there was a big peak on it, and there still is quite a few cases of measles. There are still quite a few sort of populations where there are quite a few cases, because lots of people are not getting their children vaccinated. So you can see on these diagrams, these little simple animations, how herd immunity actually works. In the top ones, we've got low percentages of people being vaccinated. In the bottom ones, you've got increasing people being vaccinated. And the more people that are vaccinated, as you can see, the slower the spread of a disease. So if we start with the top left, where there's 0% of people getting vaccinated, a disease spreads very, very quickly. As we've seen with COVID-19, where obviously no one has a vaccination, some diseases can spread incredibly quickly. If we then go to the other extreme, where 95% of the population is vaccinated, which is kind of the ideal for it to be at least 95%, it spreads incredibly slowly, because most of the people around you are vaccinated. It doesn't spread from one person to the next. Now, there are things called global vaccination programs, where certain diseases try to eradicate globally, so that it is not an issue in the future. Some of the ones that we have, but wouldn't have been that common in other countries, things like diphtheria, tetanus, measles, you probably would have heard of, and rubella. We're all vaccinated for those things, but in a lot of countries, a lot of people are not getting those vaccinations. Polio as well, even just a few decades ago, was a big thing. It would cause defects and stuff in limbs, so it was quite a serious one that would have long-term consequences. So we have these vaccination programs, which are put together by the World Health Organization, or the WHO, where they want 95% of children to have certain vaccinations. They would like, currently, there's a big push for 95% of children to have their 2 measles vaccinations. So a lot of parents will give the first vaccination, but actually you need to have 2 vaccinations for it. So a few years later, you have the second dose, so that there is a global immunity against measles, and we can eradicate it, which is what we did with disease like smallpox, which was the very first vaccination. Currently, there's about 85% of children that have the first dose of measles, and only 56% get the second. So that's only 56% of people that are protected. Right, so the last thing that I would like you to do is now answer these questions. So they are worth 5 marks each, so it should be taking you about 15 minutes to write these answers. Question 1, explain, using diagrams if they help, first of all, how the immune system of your body works. So this will be taking into consideration a lot of what we did last lesson. 1b, explain how vaccines use your immune system to protect you against serious illness. And number 2, explain why vaccines can be used against both bacterial and viral diseases. So unlike things like antibiotics, which are only bacteria, why are vaccines able to be used for both? And again, 5 marks. So take the time, pause the video, and if you could put your best answers down, and then we'll go over the answers. Okay, so grab a different colour pen and tick where you are getting the marks. So apologies, there's quite a lot of information on this one. So the first question was explain how the immune system of your body works. If you have spoken about that all cells have antigens on them, that will be worth a point, and that those are recognized by your own cells, that would be a point. The white blood cells make antibodies that target antigens, that would be a point. If you said that they stay in your body, they're called memory cells, but you don't need to call them memory cells. But if you say that they will then stay in your body, that will be a point. If you said that they can then produce antibodies really quickly if you get that pathogen again, that would be the last mark. So give yourself a total out of 5 for that, and make any corrections if necessary. Right, the next one was explain how vaccines use your immune system to protect you against serious illness. So if you said about the dead or inactive form, we must remember that term, dead or inactive form of the pathogen, then that's going to get you a mark. If you said that it causes your white blood cells to produce antibodies, or you could say that it stimulates your immune system, and then that would be a point. Needed to fight and prevent the illness that prevents you getting it in the future, that would be a point. If you said that if the pathogen then gets inside you, that disease gets inside you, you've got the right antibodies, that would be a point. And if you said that you're then protected, that you don't get ill from it, that would be a point. And the last question, so question number 2, was explain why vaccines can be used against both bacterial and viral diseases, which is a great question, quite a tricky question, so don't worry if you struggled on this one. So if you said that vaccines stimulate the immune system, then that would be a point. That they can target either bacteria or viruses, that would be a point. If you said that we can grow bacteria or viruses in the lab, or make the vaccines in the lab, then that would be a point. If you said that it's difficult, so this would be some outside knowledge on this, that it's difficult to get vaccines for things like colds, that would be a point, because they change really quickly. That also would be a point, but quite a tricky question on that one, so sorry about that if you struggle with that, but very, very well done if you're able to pick up any marks on that question. Okay, so that is it for me, that is it for this week now. Hopefully we're able to describe why people are vaccinated, so obviously to protect you from certain infectious diseases, and also you need to be able to state that they contain dead or inactive forms of the pathogen. Hopefully for 5 to 6 that we're able to explain how a vaccination works, so that's our flow chart talking about how it actually causes that immunity in you, and describe what an antibody and an antigen is. So the antibody will attach to specific antigens. The antigens are the proteins on the surface of cells. And for the top ones, explaining why large proportion of the population needs to be immunized, that's the herd immunity, and also that specific antibodies are needed for specific antigens, because all of the different diseases will have different antigens on them. Okay, so well done for accessing this lesson, and keep up the good work, stay safe, and have a lovely weekend. Thank you very much. Goodbye.